Hello and good afternoon, everyone. This is Kristina Kuprina with the next round of our series of economic outlooks. By the way, thank you very much, everyone, for your feedback. It's been really, really helpful. I noticed on the last one I did that less people came than usual, and I thought perhaps they were outliving their usefulness. But what I learned is many of you are registering, by the hundreds actually, for these and just simply can't do the times as people are going back to work and life is somewhat coming back to normal. So thank you for your feedback, because I wouldn't want to cut these short if there's still value in them. And I appreciate the fact that many sent questions in advance. So thank you for that. So first thing, I just want to start with a little bit of the disclaimer. Today I'm going to be talking about a lot of innovative technologies and things that companies and industries and sectors are doing. Regulatory reasons, I have to state that none of it should be construed as investment recommendations, advice, and whatnot. These decisions should only be made by yourself individually or with the guidance of a professional. Of course, if you have initial questions to anything I talk about, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, whether you're a client or not, and I can go further. I just want to be sure that I said that for the compliance people. So with that being said, I'm going to start with an update on the economy and where we're at right now, and talk a little bit about some risks that are there. I want to make sure I bring those up because they are, and I'm watching them closely. And then I'm going to get into some of the innovative technology and some things that are going on right now that are pretty interesting. I will on this have to check notes on occasion because I want to be sure I'm getting my data and my information correctly. So I'm going to end up wearing these most of the time. With that being said, again, thank you everyone very much for coming, and I will jump into it. So much like we talked about previously, things are recovering economically at a pretty good clip. It turns out at this point, the high probability is this will be the shortest and most severe recession in US history. Most severe by the fact is when we do get the second quarter GDP data, which we're at the very end of right now, it's going to be awful. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be numbers that we've never seen before. The results of course, COVID and shutting everything down for an extended period of time. Much of the country has reopened. I don't know if anyone's gone totally back to the way they were. I think mask wearing and social distancing will probably be a thing for an extended period of time, at least in environments where there's risk. But the economy is opening. So for the purpose of this, more on the economy. And as it's reopening, we're starting to see the effects of pent-up demand. There's a huge dispersion in where that's happening, though, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. So much of what I say is national economic numbers. I'll specify when I'm referring to a locality of some type, and because I clearly understand that every region is different, every industry is different, and every individual is different. So that being said, I wanted to step into the risks. Now, at this point, we've had tremendous stimulus by both the Federal Reserve and by the US government. Okay. Combination of that. The Federal Reserve, I've talked about this at length. They have made it clear they have more and they will do more if and when needed. They do see this as being a long game. They do not see this as being over yet. On the federal government side, Congress is getting ready to start the negotiation on, I believe it's Stimulus 5.0. I think I'm right on that at this point. And we don't really know what they're going to put in there yet. The Democrats or the House came out with their ideas. And Nancy Pelosi made it very clear that this was just a wish list or this was just a negotiating point. It was not really what they expected. But as you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of changes before the final rules get passed. I'm going to make the assumptions that whatever the House and Senate come up with after they're done negotiating, the president will almost certainly sign, because whether you like him or hate him, we can all agree he's all about the economy. And anything that's going to be stimulative or beneficial to the economy, he's probably going to agree to. Again, probably, I'm not going to try to guess what he's thinking, but I'll argue with the fact that's most likely the case. What's likely in the stimulus at this point? I'm not going to get into all the details because they're really unknown and they're just talking points in my Monday Washington report. I know what they're talking about behind closed doors. I'll bring up some of the bigger ones that are most impactful to us. One is stimulus for state and local governments. As you can imagine, they've been incredibly hit during this time. Not only the increased costs around COVID, but also the fact their revenues plummeted, tax revenues plummeted. and they're scrambling. I think we all know where California is right now, and anyone with children probably knows what the education budget cuts are going to look like next year. It's a big deal, and it can even potentially put some programs and some, many jobs certainly, but some programs and even some forms of support, governmental support, at risk. So that's a pretty universal. It's agreed upon that there needs to be some stimulus, and I would imagine that's coming out. How it's distributed and how much is unknown. Another one, let's get into the one that's another really big deal economically. I'm going to repeat something I said last time, only for the context of those who didn't hear it before, because it's important to what I'm about to say. Of the unemployed, people who are unemployed, 68% are making more money than they did when they were employed. That is a result of the CARES Act and the additional $600 a week. Of those 68%, half of them are making 43% more than they did when they were working. There's a lot of unintended consequences around that. One of the big ones being, as many of the furloughed workers are being called back to work as things reopen, it's kind of hard to want to go back to work when you're making a lot more money when you're not working. Compounding the complexity on this is that an employer is required to let you know when, let the unemployment offices know when a worker does not return to work, and they will lose their benefits. It's required by the employer. It's not an option. It's not something they're doing to be spiteful. And that puts them in an incredibly difficult position, as well as employees. So the law of unintended consequences is, how do they, as in our government and our leaders, unwind this to normalize it in a way that's not too disruptive to those who are unemployed? Because even with the growth and even with the reopening, there are many, many jobs that are still not available to people, especially in the travel and service industries, sporting events, conferences. There are many, and most of these people are on the lower end of the earning scale. And so to suddenly cut their legs out from under them and put them earning a lot less will have a lot of other repercussions across the economy. Notwithstanding, obviously, their lives, but also economically, and to anything from paying rent to paying bills to shopping, etc. So how they whittle that down, how they start to normalize it, I would imagine it's going to be done in stages, and I imagine it's going to be a great point of debate as we go forward. And so those are two major things that we expect them to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit later because I had a few questions on the PPP, and they've done a lot of extension to that. I'm not going to talk too much about it from the standpoint of there's a lot of resources available on the SBA websites and through the lenders, and it is constantly changing, and it's only relevant to a certain number of people that are listening today. On a high level, though, the PPP loan program, which many people are familiar with now, was going to companies primarily to pay their employees, to keep them on the payroll during a time which they were shut down. Now, it got a lot of bad press because there was not a lot of limitations put on it, and a lot of very large companies that probably had access to other capital potentially could have taken advantage of it. The thing is being rewritten several times. It's a lot more flexible than it used to be and a lot more targeted to small businesses. A big one is a much longer period of time to use the money and still have it forgiven. Again, won't get into all the details. The final thing, though, that I will say on that is there is still billions of dollars left in that program. There was additional funding was put in an emergency order, and it hasn't been used. So if you or anyone you know is a business that may qualify, I can't suggest or recommend enough to reach out to your lender. There's some great local banks in Santa Cruz County and Santa Clara County that can help you with this, but that money is available to you to keep your workers and to keep your business afloat during these times. And again, I had a few questions on that, but they didn't say specifically what they wanted to know about, so please reach out to me for more information, or if you want a faster answer, SBA website is a great source. I talk a little bit about the risks here. One risk is one that I think everyone's really on the forefront of people's mind. What about the second wave? What if there's another wave of COVID, coronavirus, and we shut down again? It is highly probable there will be one. I'm not an expert, and I would be guessing, just like a lot of the experts are, if that's going to happen and when and what it might look like. The important thing is that it's highly probable we'll continue to have an increase in cases as both more testing is done and as things begin to normalize and people start to get near one another again. That's not as important as the rate of ICU hospitalizations, ICU level, not just hospitalizations, because people can go to the hospital with very mild symptoms. ICU admissions and deaths. And that's, I'm certain, a number that the decision makers are looking at as well, and that's what we look at. If those numbers spike significantly, it's highly probable that there will be some pullback of some of the opening and then additional shutdown measures taken. It's also highly probable it'll be regional and targeted to the areas at highest risk. And it won't be as onerous as the first time. We, as in, I guess, us collectively, learned a lot more or know now a lot more about COVID than we knew when it first hit our shores, or we all knew it hit our shores. Apparently it's been here longer than we thought. And we're better prepared on how to protect the most vulnerable. We can see where the deaths are coming. The doctors are coming out, emergency doctors are coming out saying there's a lot of things that we did in the beginning that actually were not helpful to saving lives, and now we're better prepared. We better know how to help. And these things are important because we can make decisions much more targeted and with much more knowledge and data than once before. So I don't see at this point any situation where the shutdowns would be as onerous and as widespread and as significant as they were last time around. But if they do, the Fed is going to at least economically be there, and they have a lot of firepower left. The nice thing about their firepower is it does not go on our balance sheet. Okay, so I'm saying this where we are now. I watch this very closely, but it is highly probable. Now, there's another piece to the pie as well, is if we do have an increase in cases or cases to the point that it brings concern, even if the government does nothing, people could pull back in fear. People could go out less. Right now, right across, I'm in the Aptos office, I can see Seascape Resort, I can see Sanderling's restaurant, and right now their balcony overfacing the ocean is packed with people in the middle of the day, in the middle of the week. People want to go out, they want to socialize, they want to eat out, they want to do things, but they feel comfortable doing so. That may change if, again, we have a second wave, and that will have an economic impact. In addition to that, as you get into the cold and flu season, people are just going to become nervous anyway. Every time a cough or a sneeze or a sick person, it's the fear is going to be there, and people will still get sick from all the other things that we normally get sick from. So I do expect that we may see some volatility and some slowdowns one way or the other as we go into the winter full season because of that. If again, any of these things materialize, I'm watching that closely as well and make adjustments as necessary. The other risk is a interesting one, but it's something I'm watching closely. Wave one of the layoffs were people whose jobs were directly affected by COVID. Again, people traveling less, conference centers and whatnot needing less people. That was wave one. Wave two was the results of things being forced to shut down, like the restaurant industry, etc. Wave three could highly likely be people that still have jobs now, that thought they were safe, that are making a higher income, that now that companies can reevaluate how they do things as more and more of their workforce works remotely, and they go through a restructuring process or an adaptation process, there could potentially be risk to the higher earning management level positions. We don't see an indication of this yet on paper by data, but we are hearing the talks. So that's something to watch closely as well. And the reason behind it, very simplistically, is there's that idea of, do we need as many managers if everybody's remote? Do we need to watch people in the same way? Do we watch their computer use instead? I would imagine this will be a debate for the HR people and all the lawyers for some time. But companies are changing the way they're doing things, some temporarily and some permanently. At this point, the highest probability, based on my conversations with people at the larger tech companies and some smaller companies as well, there's probably going to be some type of flexibility in the work for most workers that aren't doing hardware, don't have to be on site, of working remotely and being in the office. Keeping the social cohesion and connection with the team in person, but also allowing people the flexibility not to have to commute into the office every day. So the workplace for those jobs that can is going to change, and the need for people or the assignment of roles is going to change. So I'm watching this one closely, and I hope I don't alarm anybody. I'm saying this because to be watchful and to be mindful is that these things usually come in waves. Wave one is the warning wave, wave two is the adaptation wave, and wave three is the, going forward, what's next wave. So I'll touch upon the biggest one of that. The other one that I'm seeing, two things that are really interesting. The consumer savings rate in this country right now is the highest it's ever been at 33%. 33%. That is the consumer savings rate. Before this happened in February, we had a high number. It was exciting to us as economists. It was 8%. Why? Tremendous amount of stimulus. And in addition, people saving because of the uncertainty. In addition to the fact that people couldn't spend in the way they did. Very little travel. Can't go to the stores and shop in the way you did before. Yes, you could go to Amazon. Yes, you can go to Home Depot. But a lot of things people spend money on was not available for a period of time. So the uncertainty combined with the additional stimulus, combined with, and a lot of people still working, right? Combined with the inability to spend, 2/3 of our economy is consumer spending. So what happened to that money? Saved. So what's happening now is people feel more financially secure. Again, I'm being very broad-based in general. I clearly understand it's not the same for everyone. And as people want to go out and spend, businesses who have been shut down have to catch up. And we're already seeing that. Businesses that don't have, they're trying to play catch up. It's just starting now, but when this takes fire, and it will, as we come out of this, if you're a business owner, be prepared that you could see significant growth beyond your expectations, a combination of pent-up demand and additional money. Another thing we're seeing, states competing with each other. That was part of the race to open, was states competing with each other. If Michigan's closed and Ohio's open, where do you move your supply chain? Where do you do business? And so states are competing with who can be open and who can best serve. States are also competing for businesses. We have the best tax environment. We have the best employee environment because companies are actually considering they can be anywhere. Because they can be anywhere, then they actually have the ability for their workforce to be in different locations. So that being said, that's the important parts of that to consider. Watch that very closely. People can live in different places than they once thought that they could. Okay. I think I touched upon the biggest risks in sectors. This is going to tie into the innovation part of it. There are certain sectors that are being incredibly disrupted right now. The financial sector, the energy sector, the retail sector. The retail sector speaks for itself. There's such disruption taking place that some of these companies are not going to come out of this alive. In fact, I would say a number of them. There are other sectors as well, but these are ones that are familiar to a lot of people. Technology, on the other hand, has boomed as a whole, not all companies, as a whole, has boomed during this time. Why is that? Technology is how we got through this as we have. Technology allowed your sheltered-in-place grandmother, okay, or mother to be able to communicate with the grandkids. It allowed you to work from home remotely if that was available to you. It allowed us to still be in connection and contact and work and share information and do a lot of things. Had COVID hit us 20 years earlier, imagine if 2000 was the COVID year, we would have not even remotely been prepared as well as we are now. And I'm not talking about prepared for the virus because we clearly weren't prepared for that, but prepared to function as a society in some way or another. And because of that, the need and use of technology has increased rapidly. I have clients and family members that did their first shopping on Amazon and their first family get-togethers on Zoom or FaceTime or something like that. We've had Zoom for a very long time at Sequoia, and most clients didn't want to use it. They want to come see me in person, which is great. I love seeing people in person. Now everybody's on Zoom. I have a feeling that people will use it a lot more often because of the convenience of not having to drive. So the forced adaptation changes how things happen. It also speeds us up as well. Because things that we didn't think we could do, we can now see we can do. And because we can do it, we feel more confident and comfortable. And some things we'll go back to and other things that will stay with the technology. So I'm going to jump into the innovation side of it. And the technology sector, I want to say, is that it's a very broad term. And I want to make sure I'm identifying it properly because there's a lot of different pieces to that puzzle. The thing about technology that's pretty universal, though, is they adapt and innovate fastest. Also, when I'm talking about some of this, it's not just your traditional technology firms or companies I'm talking about. And I'm going to talk about a big one here because it's probably the biggest of all of this. An example is the supply chain. I've mentioned this before, the supply chain. The reason we couldn't get toilet paper was not that toilet paper wasn't available, and was not because toilet paper is not really easy to manufacture. Okay? Toilet paper, it's a supply chain issue. That when they shut down the meatpacking plants because of the COVID outbreaks, it's a supply chain issue. Okay, they had to kill animals. Sadly, a lot of animals. They had to plow fields under. Supply chain issue. If all of your crops are being grown for restaurants and for the conference and entertainment industry, and that's all shut down, what do? You can't. Your supply chain doesn't adapt. You can't find buyers fast enough. It's a perishable item. It gets plowed under. The technology is there to make very, very, very efficient supply chains. It exists now. And there are companies that's amazing how quickly they're starting to look to adapt to it. Not only for necessity, because if they don't, somebody else will, but also to be ahead of their competitors. Because if I was a store and I needed things delivered to me in a timely manner in order to sell to my customers, I certainly want the person that can best deal with disruption. Not just COVID. We have disruption all the time. We have natural disasters. It's an example of that, right? How can you do it? So there's a tremendous amount of money being put out right now by a lot of companies in the supply chain, and some of them are not the companies you think of as technology companies. That's a really, really big area, and that innovation and that ability to find better and faster ways of doing things. Unfortunately, there'll be collateral damage because as you make things more efficient, some nodes in the supply chain may become less important. Some businesses that are intermediaries may start to go away. So that's something to watch very closely if you're one of those businesses, and how your supply chain looks, and also if there's anything that you can do differently with the adaptation to technology. This is a good one. This will really kind of take us to where we're going. If we're talking about the inflation comes up a lot, but the one thing about it is productivity is the antidote to inflation. The more productive we are, the less inflation we get. That's very simplistic, and there's a lot of parts to it, but that's a consideration. And the productivity is being changed. So think of your productivity, for an example, if you can work from home and you don't have to commute, and you can get your same workload done in 5 hours instead of 8 hours, right? If you're paid by work, if a worker's paid for the work they provide rather than the time spent, it's best for everybody. Even if it's the same money, the employer's getting the same production for the same amount of money, but the employee is getting the same amount of money for less of their time. And even if it's still an 8-hour day, they're not commuting back and forth. So that's a lot of what we're seeing with the technology. I'm going to come to some of the areas to see. So here's some things that are actually literally in development as I speak and are really exciting. I'm going to touch upon a few before I go a little bit further. Also, I can't stress enough, please add the questions in. I'm going to pull that up here just for a moment. If you have questions about anything, please add them. I have a few that people have sent to me. If you don't have any questions, you don't have to add them, and I will end this early so you can not have to listen to me any longer. But do add any question about anything I'm saying or topics you want me to talk about. I have the information. I'll share it with you. Okay, so about 350,000 heart attacks happen outside of hospitals every year. Okay? Only 12% of them survive. Why? It takes an ambulance on average of 11 minutes. And that's on average, okay, to get to you, okay, once 911's called. That's why the survival rate's so low. They're literally right now building and testing drone ambulances. They can come with one or two, I think up to two, I guess I'll use the paramedic or doctors. It flies as the crow flies. No roads, no traffic, nothing like that. It flies as the crow flies, gets there, starts the life-saving process until the actual ambulance can get there. So think about that. Think about drone ambulances. It is expected that that will save at least 20,000 lives annually. At least. Okay. So there you go. Drone ambulances. This is already in development. It's gotten actually pretty far in development. Autonomous vehicles, you've heard me probably talk about this before. It's a big deal, and it's going to happen a lot faster than we think, and it's moving very rapidly. It's not just fully autonomous, in which you just sit in your car and it drives you everywhere. Even partially or mostly autonomous cars, they are happening faster than you think. They're expected to save 80,000 lives a year. So keep that one in mind. These are life-saving things, and these numbers, by the way, you start adding them up, are really significant number of people that won't die. I would call it prematurely. I don't know what premature death is, but die from avoidable accidents, certainly. Another thing is taking off right now rapidly, and with people that hadn't been. It used to be kind of something more younger people would use. It's taken off rapidly, which are digital wallets. Okay, so we've probably heard of Apple Pay, Google Pay, and things like that. Venmo, big one, Venmo. Well, now cash in this environment is seen as a super spreader, right? Ugh, cash. I literally had to buy something for $1.58, and I literally paid for cash that was sitting in a little box in my car to do that. And I think she cringed when I handed her to her. It's dirty. It's super spreader. So this idea that things can be done through digital wallets, it's just accelerating that right now because businesses are encouraging people to use non-cash forms of payment, and more people are signing on for these types of services. So that's something really, really interesting to look at. It's really interesting to look at how that impacts the credit card companies going forward. It won't happen tomorrow, but it'll happen. And it's one of those things that all these technologies, they start really slow, and all of a sudden they skyrocket. What causes them to skyrocket is adoption and cost declines. Okay, and you can iPhone's a good one in recent times. You can model that out for almost any technology. Tesla's another one you can model that out for. Tesla cars used to start at like 120, 130, 40,000, whatever, right? That was a going rate. That had a limited market. The people that had the money to spend and wanted to buy a Tesla. Now you can buy them at less than 40,000, and it's faster adoption. It's more affordable. The other one I want to talk about, because there's a lot going on right now in the home tech space. I'm not an expert in it, but I've seen it within my clients, and I've seen it within what we're seeing again, modeling the technology in home tech of all sorts. We heard for years about the smart home or the connected home, and that didn't really take off, but it's taking off in different ways. And a big part of it is how families and households, especially when everybody's living together, is using technology. So that's an area too. And there's a lot of companies, some of these are non-traditional, right? I mean, if you want to have a smart refrigerator, it's not going to be built by Google, right? There's a lot of companies that are innovating in this. Skip past, I'll touch upon one more on this area. Education and telemedicine. A lot more of our lives is going to be done just as you're seeing me right now, virtually. Okay, a lot more of our lives are going to be that way. I don't want to get into to try to predict what's going to happen to the education system, the K-12 education system, because I really don't know. I don't have children, and I've only heard probably what everybody else has heard. But we can all agree it's going to be very different the next school year at least, and possibly going forward. And how does that work? How do we adapt to being more responsible for our children's education ourselves, at least making sure they sit in front of the Zoom and watch the teacher? How are we able to best support kids who need specialized teaching, specialized learning beyond the capabilities of the parents? How do we adapt to the parents that may be first-generation immigrants that don't have the skills to be able to teach their children and to work with them? There's a lot that we're going to have to learn, in this space, but it's definitely happening. Telemedicine is a really, really good example. When you couldn't see your doctor, if you wanted an appointment, even if it was just a check-in, you did it through telemedicine. That whole area is taking off, and it's going to be immensely, immensely popular. It's a way to reduce costs, and it's a way to increase compliance, because it's a lot easier to log in and talk to your doctor, especially for smaller issues, than it is to get in the car and schedule an appointment 6 weeks out. So the telemedicine, that's here to stay. It's not a temporary thing, and I think it's going to be used. I can say by data, it's going to be used a lot more going forward. I think a final one I'll just talk on this one is pretty cool, which is the DNA sequencing and what's going to happen with medicine going forward. So one of the really interesting things about it is that I learned, which was fascinating, your DNA can change. Yes, your DNA can change. There's a whole lot of science behind it. I think it's called epigenetics. Read up on that because it's pretty interesting stuff. So your DNA can change. In addition to that, your care can be adapted to your DNA, to your genetic profile, with great success. A lot of what has been challenging in medicine is you have a condition, but treatments don't work the same on all people. You also have different people that are more predisposed to catching something or developing something than others. But even that's not an exact science, because they're finding that even if you have a family history of XYZ cancer, how your diet, exercise, your lifestyle, your mental state, emotional state, actually impacts your probability of getting the cancer. This has been shown by science. So there's a lot of customized details or personal details that really affect your health beyond just what you do and how you were born. There is this area of science is emerging so rapidly, and so much is being known and understood. Even around COVID, they're showing now that certain people have certain, I want to say, I'm not going to use the right terminology here, but certain cells within them that make it less likely that they'll get seriously ill from COVID. Okay, it's nothing to do with whether they were exposed to it and have antibodies or not exposed to it. It's if you have this certain makeup within you, you're just less likely to. Don't want to talk too much about it because I don't know the details. But the more we understand about our individualized body and systems, the better able we're going to be able to care for, treat, and save people. And this is a major area, and there's a lot of companies working in this space right now, and that is an area that I put a lot of focus in investing because I see that as being the future, both preventative and treatment as well. Oh, I'm going to take a break for a moment here because I have a bunch of questions, and I want to make sure that I cover them and see if there's anything else, and then the last part. Let's see. How will the current protests and the move to reduce law enforcement affect the economy? And I see who sent it. I won't call you out, I promise. It probably will not have an impact on the economy. I will step aside from the social and the other impacts of it, of course. And I'm purely speaking as an economist here, so it's not that I'm not aware of what's going on, and it's not that I don't understand the social impacts on many levels. I'm purely going to speak economically here because that's what you're here to hear. That's what you're here to hear. It won't really have much of an impact unless they really, really, really get out of control and it forces businesses to shut down for long periods of time. This is not the first time this has happened to us. It will not be the last time. The subject could be different, but the protests and I want to separate, by the way, as I have before, protesting from looting and destruction. Okay, so the looting and the destruction and the rioting is what I'm going to refer to here, because protests in themselves don't really have an economic effect, to the economy. It can change people's behavior, it can change the way they do things, but protesting has been going on as long as we've been a nation, and actually well before we were a nation. So I'm going to refer here specifically more to the violence and the looting and whatnot. If it continues on a wide scale, or if it resurges, since it seems to have eased back a bit on a national level, it could be because businesses will close as a protective measure. Many of us may have seen the videos of stores being broken into and just completely cleared out, large stores like Walmarts and whatnot, just being cleared out. And if a business feels that that's a risk of happening and the law enforcement is not able or willing to protect it, and I'm not picking on the law enforcement, I'm simply saying, if there's a lot going on, they can't protect everything, right? That could have an impact. If stores or even cities are shut down, if people don't feel safe going downtown to have a lunch or go to a movie, that could have an impact. But overall, the protests themselves. Now, as far as law enforcement, I don't know the details about this. I understand there's a lot of variations in it. But I think one of the most unfortunate things is calling it defund the police, because when you read what they're actually, not they, I shouldn't say that because there's a lot of opinions on this, but at least in California, you read, it's more of changing how things are done. So if there's a balance where the police can have less responsibility of things that they don't need to do with their skills, and other people can step in and they can focus on protecting and serving, then again, I don't think there's going to be a major impact because the security and safety can be provided. Please understand, I'm an economist, and this is really outside of my expertise. So I am speaking from an economic standpoint of adjustments to law enforcement and how it's done probably will not have an economic impact, provided people have safety and security, which is the basic thing that all people want. And I want to stress all people want. So again, I know I kind of walked into that clumsily, but I want to be sure I was staying on the economic front to it. But yeah, really important question. And I want to add, because someone asked me a question about what was going on in Seattle with them shutting off CHOP or whatever it's called, some area of the town, and it's kind of a police-free space. And they said, what will happen with that? The Occupy Wall Street crowd did about the same thing. I'm sure there's been other protests like it before. It's probably, again, the economic impact is much more to that region that's shut down, or is, I guess, not shut down, but barricaded off. And I think that Seattle will figure it out. I can't really have an opinion on it from a wide scale, because it's one thing that's happening there. So I would imagine that they're working on that, not really an economic question at this point. How do you think cryptocurrencies will take off now that cash is no longer preferred? If so, which cryptocurrency has the best chance to dominate? The hardest thing with the cryptocurrency is it's not easily accessible to most people. The gatekeepers to get into it for the average person who's not sophisticated can be onerous and sometimes even fraudulent. And the volatility of it, the fluctuation in value, can be extreme, much more extreme than most anyone would want with their cash. So at this time, it's more, and I have to stress, I'm not allowed to make any recommendations on Bitcoin or cryptocurrency per regulations. So it's something that I can't talk about on this video chat in detail. Talk to me outside of this if you have more questions. I want to separate that from it's where you put your cash to what you might speculate in or invest in. Okay, so it probably would not be something people would want to put cash in just because of those things and other reasons. As an investment vehicle, again, I'm not allowed to speak on or recommend it. It depends on what it is that what you seek to do. Because I will tell you, currencies will change in the future. Currencies will definitely change on a global scale in the future. We're not quite there yet. The U.S. is still strong enough to support even our higher debt levels for at least the foreseeable-ish future, which is 3 to 5 to 8 years. That's pretty much how far you can see this out. There's a lot of things that will warn us when that's no longer going to be the case. And I know I've heard my entire career, and people before me have heard since we went off the gold standard in the 70s, that our currency is going to become worthless. We are still the economic superpower, provided we can keep that position. We have a lot of power that the rest of the world doesn't have. We also have the Federal Reserve, which can do a lot of extraordinary things, as we've seen. If you want to compare our economy and markets to the rest of the world right now, you can see the meaningful difference. All of this behavior is going to lead to issues in the not too distant future, and there's going to be a lot of options to look at. And as we get closer, it's easier to make those recommendations. So sorry I couldn't be more specific about the Bitcoin. Again, I'm more encumbered by regulations than my knowledge on the subject. Okay, I talked about the PPP. Inflation, that comes up a lot. As I mentioned earlier, productivity helps negate a lot of inflation. We can see that coming to the point the Fed has a lot of arrows, and there's a lot they can do to minimize it if they're in front of it, on top of it. I don't see it for at least the next couple of years. I just don't. I think we're going to things will be fairly flat. The bigger risk to inflation is going to be, remember I talked about companies keeping up with the consumers? It could literally be the demand of things become greater than the supply, and you could see localized inflation in areas as opposed to widespread wholesale inflation or the Fed raising rates to try and stay on inflation. But I expect if the demand for products or services is greater than the supply, we will get localized or industry or product-specific inflation. You maybe would have seen that with toilet paper, except I think there's some kind of rule that you can't raise your prices more than a certain amount during times of crisis. I talked about the second wave, government funding, especially schools, I believe I covered. Oil. Oil prices are somewhat a byproduct of the economy. And while prices are rising significantly off of April's negative rates, they probably will cap out 50, 60 a barrel, at least for the foreseeable future. There's a lot of things changing it, one of which is we just don't need as much of it. We just don't need as much of it, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Everything from electric vehicles to the way that we're producing plastics and packaging, to the way that technology is taking a lot of machinery off the roads. If I had to pick something that was at the most risk in the near future, I'd say the internal combustible engine, especially with multiple companies now competing with who's going to build the first widespread large truck for transportation of goods. Tesla already has one, but they have competitors working on it as well. Okay, it's a funny question. How long will we have to wear masks? I'm sorry, I really have no idea. The only thing I think is that if you look at it, and I will honestly tell you, I only wear masks when required. I don't care for them, but I would never not care for my fellow humans by not making sure everybody around me feels safe. So I'm waiting for the day we don't have to wear them with excitement. But that being said, the one thing to consider is the fact that the reason people are going out and doing things is they feel safe doing it. Okay? I used the shark story before. I'll repeat it briefly here. When there's a shark attack, different people will get into the water again after the shark is gone at different rates, depending on their level of concern or fear. In addition, with COVID, there are people that are much higher risk of death or serious illness than others. And so in order for our economy to function and function well, and for things to open up and us to get back to some semblance of normalcy, people have to feel safe. People feel safe at this time by social distancing and by masks. And I'm well aware of the fact that the guidance is constantly changing and nobody really knows how much difference it makes. But if it makes people feel comfortable, it's something that will probably be done for the foreseeable future. I'm speaking economically. I will not speak on the health aspects of it because, again, the experts don't know in many ways. Certainly I don't know. But economically, if you feel comfortable going out because people are being protective, then you will. Airlines are a good example. So you guys have heard me talk before about the airlines. Low point, 86,000 people were flying based on TSA checkpoints. That was in mid-April. Okay, normally over 2 million fly a week. Last week, 500,000, we hit the number. So you see the rapid rate of people flying around the country. And remember, the rest of the world, much of it's shut. I'm supposed to be in Peru next week. That's clearly not happening. The rest of the world shut. Domestic travel has gone from 86,000 to 500,000. People are flying again. You get on a plane, some airlines I think are requiring masks, some are not. But you get on a plane, that is the opposite of social distancing. So you can imagine they're the bravest people. If things need to be done to make people feel safe, getting on airplanes, going to restaurants, to shopping, that they're likely going to be going on for the foreseeable future. Again, I would imagine. Kind of a little bit off the economic front, but there was an economic component to that. Okay, I think I may have, last ones. Facebook, Twitter, media wars. Where is it going? Okay, second to last questions of that one. On a high level, you got Twitter, you got Facebook, and the government's kind of been on them a bit about trying to control news and deciding what's real news and what's fake news. And there's a little reasoning behind it, which makes perfectly logical sense. And I'm going to do the best I can as an economist to explain this. I'm not a media expert. The news stations, newspapers, and whatnot, they have requirements that they give some form of, it's making sure the news is accurate. And I know everyone's probably really laughing at that one because I don't think that really feels like the way it is most of the time. But at least they have some liability and responsibility, and they can technically be sued for it. Not only libel and slander, but also not some kind of degree of diligence or fact-checking. I know, again, you can all laugh. I can't hear you, but I'm laughing inside. But there's requirements. Facebook, Twitter, and the like, YouTube, they are what's called a platform, and I believe it's Rule 213 or something like that. That means because they're classified as a platform, that they're just hosting or allowing people to post, but they're not controlling or curating, they have that special exemption. That makes sense, right? Well, now some of them, especially recently YouTube and Twitter, have been starting to try to curate or decide what's real news, what's fake news, what should be posted because it agrees with the government or status quo. It's not just political, some is political. I think Donald Trump got flagged by Twitter. It's also people with different views on other topics or issues. And we're not going out to the extremes here. We're just saying, hey, we're a scientist, we see COVID a little differently type of thing. So, excuse me. The reason I bring that up is this is going to be, I think there's going to be hearings in Washington, it's going to be a fight. So Twitter on one hand is starting to want to decide what's real, what's fake, target it, put specific notifications and whatnot. Facebook on the other hand has stood back and said we're a platform, we don't want to get into that. I think this is going to be a big issue going forward, and I think it's going to have a financial impact, economic impact, but I'm not sure. I think it's more of a news media. And, excuse me, dry throat. And it's important too because I think Twitter culled millions and millions of fake accounts that were set up from China that were designed specifically to create political divisiveness. I mean, they weren't real accounts. They were all linked to China, and they just cleared them out. So they're doing a good job to clear out a lot of stuff that we probably shouldn't have, which is the fake accounts. But deciding what's real and fake news is a really slippery slope, and I think that's going to be really interesting to see. Economically, it'll be interesting to see if there's going to be impact to the stock in any way. Not at this time, but interesting to watch. The last question of all, how do you plan for uncertainty? Oh, how do you plan with uncertainty, sorry. Well, planning is like an intention, right? So you have an intention of what it is you want to accomplish. You don't have to have it all fully understood. Just, okay, I wanted this. So I usually say, what do you want to achieve? Look at the highest level you can. What is it you want to achieve? And then just kind of build it all down from there. And that's a process we do with clients in the financial planning. The highest thing is what is it you want to achieve, and all the other parts fit together. And sometimes what makes it complicated is people kind of flip that upside down, saying, here's all the stuff I have to do. Here's all the stuff I have to do. I have to save for retirement, or I have to do this, or I have to do that. And they don't have the top being the priority, the one thing that they want to accomplish, the broad picture, the everything, holistic. What is this thing that I want? They kind of flip it upside down and focus on all the to-dos. So it makes it, when you're focusing on all the to-dos, it makes the uncertainty even more uncertain because there's not a clear focus. So on the planning side, even whether you're doing a whole financial plan or you're just trying to figure out what's next in life, like a lot of people are right now, there's a lot of change, is figuring out what is the highest and most important thing to you as a person to accomplish. And it's usually a list of things. It's not usually one thing. And just put that at top. And it shouldn't have anything to do with finance. It doesn't mean anything financial. But you figure that, and then all the decision making kind of flows down from that because you always have a North Star to look at. When you're planning for anything, if the plan has a degree of flexibility, it helps you adapt to life. Okay? So me as an economist, there's no hard science in economics. It changes by the minute. I could tell you something today, and 2 weeks later I could say, maybe not, right? There's no hard science. It's not like math or a lot of other things where we have, there's sort of an absolute. And actually, I was going to say math and science, but I'm studying quantum physics, and I just realized that there's no certainty even in science. There's so much that's unknown and so much that can be seen from different ways. So planning on uncertainty for me, when I'm planning, when I'm managing portfolios, when I'm looking at data, I have to make a decision, but I'm really comfortable making a change if something changes. Not only in the markets and the economy, but also in the clients' lives. And I have never in my career had this number of clients coming to me wanting to revisit some of the plan, to rethink life, to do things a little differently. And some of it we're just vision boarding, we're just talking, we're not ready to really adjust anything yet, just what's possible. Other people are like, I've made a decision, I'm going a different direction. Now I'll tell you, it's not all positive. Some people are dealing with some really, really big challenges in life. Some people are dealing with mental health related issues. Some people are dealing with confronting substance abuse issues with themselves or with a family member. Health, there's a lot going on, a lot of challenges as well. But all of it requires revisiting planning. And that's something I just to be in service in this way is really, it's really big deal to me. Sorry, I know I mentioned this before, but there's a lot of that going on. So the idea is if you're just kind of poking around, if you're doing some contemplation and you're saying, wonder if I could do this, wonder if I could do that, reach out to me and we'll plug in. We don't have to fundamentally change everything. We'll plug in some numbers and take a look at it. Kind of the thing I was to say before is there's this sort of, on a high level, if you imagine two circles and they intersect, there's this dark area where they intersect, and then one circle is what's important to you, and the other side of the circle is what are you willing to do or can afford to do, right? And they kind of intersect right here, and this area is exactly where you should focus on, that middle ground right between the two of them. And that's sometimes we find ourselves focusing on all the things we can't control. I have no control over it, but I'm going to worry and focus on it. Or we focus on things that we don't really want, don't really value. We just feel like we're supposed to, or we have to, or everybody else is doing it, or it's easy, something to do today because I'm bored. And that's where a lot of the uncertainty comes from, which makes it even harder to focus. The final one is like a coil. I see something that I want. I really want that. I really, really want that. And it keeps going around like a kind of a coil, right? And you're focused on it, and finally you get it. Okay? And then the coil's going in. It's, I really want that. And you keep doing that. And then at some point you go, am I happy yet? Right? It's that focusing on that one without seeing that big picture. And I'm actually going to do a presentation a little bit more in detail. I'm supposed to do this live with all of you in person in the fall. I doubt that's going to happen. So I'm going to do kind of a webinar on it. But it's kind of revisiting how you think about a lot of things. It makes the planning easy. A lot of the planning's hard is because there's so much information and so much data hitting us from so many different points. It's keeping that North Star, what's the most important thing. And it isn't about the money. The money is a tool in the toolbox of life. It's an important tool in many ways, but it's not the be-all and end-all. If it was, all the people that had a lot of money would be really, really happy people. And we all know that's not true. And all the people that have very little money would be very unhappy people. And we know that's not true as well. So what is the secret sauce? And there's a lot to it. I'll save it for a future webinar. With that being said, I'm going to do the last couple of questions and then I'll sign off. So if you have anything else you want to know, let me know. And then I'll also talk to you a little bit about an upcoming webinar that's going to be a bit different than all the rest of them so far. What is the best type of IRA for a young person to invest in? It depends. And again, I don't want to give generalized advice because there's a lot of varieties to this. If it's a young person at a lower end of the income, first job, early career, a Roth is usually the best because they don't get the tax deduction when they put it in, but they never have to pay taxes when it's out. So that's a really cool thing. So imagine a 21-year-old goes and gets their first job and puts some money in a Roth, or maybe the parents put money in the Roth, because as long as your kid's earning money, you, the parents, can also put money in, as long as you don't go over the annual limit. And that money grows at a reasonable rate of return. And even if they don't add another dollar to it, just with a very modest rate of return, it could double in 12 years. Okay? Again, no promises of any investment performance or returns, and that is the 6% return, so that's a pretty conservative one. And if they continue to add money, they can have a significant amount of money saved and never have to pay taxes on it for their future. Again, there's variables that could change that, but generally, young people starting out, I'm be inclined to do the Roth IRA. So let me spend the last part talking a little bit about what I'm watching right now, and then I'm going to jump into the next webinar. So we have kind of a balance here between the virus on one side, imagine a scale, and stimulus on the other side. Okay, so my camera here, virus and stimulus, and these keep weighing each other out. Okay, more cases, you know, the virus weighs us down, more the economy, this, that. So we're back and forth. It's this point we have been able to use stimulus and opening to help offset the virus and the uncertainty around that. That scale is going to continue to tip one direction or the other. If we get, again, additional cases, if we get concerns, if we get this, we get that, we're going to wait. So expect the markets can be volatile, ride through it, don't worry, despite what you hear in the news. If you're a client of mine, I'm watching everything very, very closely. The advantage of not having travel for business or any, pretty much anything else is I have plenty of time to do this. I'm watching closely. If you're not a client of mine, make sure it's being watched closely. If you have questions, ask me. You don't have to hire me. I'll just point you in the right direction if you want to know how. But keep an eye on it because some sectors and companies will not recover from this. And you want to make sure it's not in your index fund or anywhere else just sitting there. That weighing between stimulus and virus is going to be a big issue, and it's going to drive the markets up and down. Another thing, and I'll talk more about this as we get closer, the election is going to be great fun, as you can imagine. It doesn't really put a risk to the economy. We pretty much know at this point it's going to be Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Well, assuming they're both, still with us at the time, but that's what we expect. We don't know who the VP for Biden will be yet. I'm just going to assume with Donald Trump it's going to be Pence. So we kind of know what we're working with, but I can imagine it's going to be a very contentious ride to get us there. As we get closer, I'll talk more about the economy around that because we'll have a better clarity when we see who the Biden's VP might be. Okay, so with the last part here, I just want to talk a little bit about the upcoming webinar. So next week, I had 2 different topics I'm going to talk about, and I'm waiting for my economic data that will come out tomorrow to decide which one's most relevant. I do greatly value your ideas and suggestions. The ones I've gotten are not enough to really focus the whole webinar on. However, regardless of the title, any topic that's brought up to me, either by conversation, by email, or by the chat window, I will definitely address it. Even if it's not the topic. I'm keeping this very free-flowing because I don't think there's anything I could talk about for an hour that would be that interesting. Oh, sorry. It's this last one. If I have a defined benefit plan, am I still working? Do I need to find another way? The answer to your question is yes. Please reach out to me because this is highly individualized. If you reach out to me, I will answer your questions because I don't know who you are. But yes, there are ways to do it, a number of ways actually. So our webinar after this one, not the next one, the one after that, we're going to go into financial planning topics. This is really, really important right now because there's been tremendous changes in the laws and in the rules, not only with the Secure Act that passed early in the year, but also with the CARES Act and the stimulus. And I would imagine more will come up in the not too distant future as we get to the next round of stimulus. These are really, really important things. Your ability to defer taxes on distributions from IRAs, your ability not to take RMD distributions this year, the ability to use 529 plan money differently. There's tremendous amounts of new rules, and a lot of it got buried and all the rest of the things have been going on, market the economy. But I really want to have time to go over those topics. And with me will be Katie Linfeld, who's our certified financial planner at Sequoia. Many of you may know her. For those of you who don't, she's been with Sequoia since the beginning, and she's very knowledgeable in financial planning topics. And just so you get a little less of Kristina and a little more of someone else that's really smart, she's going to be talking about these subjects. The idea of this is not to guide you and to tell you what to do because how you use this information is highly individualized. It's just to let you know what's possible and what's out there. Again, there's so many rules have changed around the CARES Act and around the Secure Act that have not gotten a lot of news. I want to be sure people are aware of it. So that's going to be in the middle of July. And it's also, I'll talk on that one a little bit more about how you plan for a post-COVID economy. Okay, my part will be much smaller. So I want to thank everyone very much for coming today or for watching this recording after the fact, and for all of your time to put the questions out either in advance or during today's webinar. As long as everyone finds value in these, I will continue to do them, and I look for your guidance as to what the subjects are. I also look forward to talking to you individually as you're interested to. Reach out to me. We'll schedule a time so I can take this further and deeper in whichever ways that you're interested in. As I mentioned before, my highest purpose during this time and quite frankly, my career is to serve, is to help other people, and I really enjoy the opportunity to do that. We are seeing people face to face now, so if you want to see me and come into the office, we are prepared to do that. Just let me know or let Madison know when she does the scheduling. We're pretty much back to as we were. That being said, again, I want to thank everyone very much for coming today, and for my clients for the confidence that you have put in me to manage the money and do the planning through this time and for your future. And for those of you who are not my clients, thank you for tuning in, and I appreciate your input and your feedback as well. Thank you all, and have a good afternoon. I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.